Jamil Jaffer is the executive director with the National Security Institute at George Mason University. Jamil, as always, thanks for being with us. Both the U.S. and Iran declaring victory after yesterday's ceasefire agreement. Who's right and who's wrong?
Well, it's hard to see how the U.S. Might declare victory at this point, given that Iran has now reclosed the Straits of Hormuz. We know that they obviously have the military capability to do that. That's obviously been a huge sticking point. They also have all this highly enriched uranium that we've been talking about since the beginning of this conflict that remains in Iran, the 60% enriched uranium, about 440 kilograms. Of course, we have had significant victories. We've destroyed in a significant way their Navy. We've taken out their missile launch capability, drone launch capability, but they still have a lot of drones. They still have a lot of missiles. And of course, the president on day one talked about regime change. We're not really close to that, other than, in fact, the supreme leader has been swapped out for his son, and a number of senior leaders have been killed. But the reality is the Iranian regime and the people who run it, the IRGC, are still very much in charge.
Jamil, that being said, this is something that has always struck me as being curious. Basically, in the early days of this war, the Allied forces, the United States and Israel, killed the Ayatollah's father, killed his wife, killed his son. How do you bounce back from that? How do you basically sit across the negotiating table and capitulate on anything?
Well, that's a great question, Del. The reality is that if, in fact, Iran is going to come out from under the pressure of this conflict, they're going to have to make some sort of a deal. Now, they've laid out a 10-point plan. We've seen various versions of this 10-point plan in the last few days. It's not clear what the U.S. thinks we agreed to, but the Iranians have laid out a plan that seems pretty favorable to them. It doesn't talk about nuclear enrichment. In fact, there's a suggestion that we might accept their nuclear enrichment, which obviously President Trump has said was off the table and was part of an Obama nuclear deal that he walked away from. So we'll see what this negotiation looks like, but it's going to be very hard to come, I think, to your point, to an agreement that both the Iranians can accept, the U.S. can accept in the next 2 weeks, given how far apart we've been, at least to date.
Did the U.S. lose more than just what happened on the battlefield? We're talking 13 U.S. soldiers. We're talking several planes and that daring rescue attempt, which was successful. But did it lose the moral high ground after President Trump's tweets that if Iran didn't meet his demands, the U.S. would end an entire civilization? From the White House press briefing today, it was clear that the White House is still wrestling with the fallout from that tweet.
Well, obviously that tweet and then the tweet before it, or the Truth Social post before it, on Easter Sunday, dropping the F-bomb on sort of a public media source and talking about destroying power plants and the like. These are not things that I think help President Trump achieve his objective. Although, to be fair to him, it did bring the Iranians to the table, it did get the Chinese to put pressure on the Iranians through the Pakistanis, and ultimately got to whatever this deal is that we have, this ceasefire. That being said, it didn't earn us a lot of credibility with our allies around the globe. It's not clear that it actually scared the Iranians that much, in the sense that they appeared ready to press forward and kept the Straits of Hormuz closed. So we'll see at the end of the day how much this really affects the dynamic. But it was not an ideal scenario. And obviously, President Trump was never going to uphold that view, because it would have been horrifically bad and it would have been extremely difficult to do and would have come at a massive cost to the U.S. credibility for decades. And so we were never going to do that. We were never going to destroy civilization. So using that language was not the right thing to do, clearly.
Jamil, what are we to make of the fact that Russia and China appear to be the winners in this entire scenario?
Well, certainly China has gotten a lot more, wasta, as the term goes in the Middle East, more swag, more juice. They now are viewed as a key party in bringing Iran to the table. We knew that China was close to Iran. We knew that Russia was close to Iran. They supplied them with weapons. They've long been in collaboration. This just makes it clear now they have a lot of influence in the region as well. That's not good for American interests. We've always been the dominant power in that region. That's actually worked to our benefit for many, many years. It's gotten us embroiled in conflicts, to be sure, but it's also worked to our benefit. Giving that up to China and allowing them to be part of this conversation is not net going to be a benefit for the United States.
Jamil, going back to the Russia probe, the watchwords from the White House were no collusion, no collusion, no collusion. We heard that millions of times after the Mueller probe into whether or not the president did collude with Russia. But now, with several years under our belt and knowing what has happened with regards to this particular situation with Iran, the fact that Russia targeted U.S. forces and also managed to make more money off of its oil as a result of this, the sanctions being lifted, what are we to make now of the White House position when it comes to Russia, specifically since the president, once again, talking poorly of NATO.
Well, look, we've kept the pressure up on Russia and Ukraine. The president said that he wanted to end this war as soon as possible. He talked about ending it before he came into office. He's been trying for the last year and a half now to end this conflict. It hasn't succeeded. And the U.S. continues to supply military hardware and intelligence to Ukraine, as do our NATO allies, and they continue to extract costs from the Russians on the battlefield. Now, the fact that the president hasn't changed his view on Russia is obviously concerning, given that Russia has not done what he's asked them to do, which is to come to the table and make a deal. And in fact, they have actually been targeting Americans, to your point, in Iran, giving Iran intelligence to kill Americans. That obviously should be making the president upset. On the other hand, to your point, he's been reduced sanctions on Russia to get the world price of oil down, and it wasn't really successful. Ultimately, it did require the Straits of Hormuz to be reopened, or at least a deal to be made, and the world price of oil to come down last night. We'll see if it rebounds now that it's clear the Straits of Hormuz have not been fully reopened. The next few days will tell us a lot. But I do think that, to your point, both Russia and China have gained some in this conflict. Neither of those are positive things for the United States, given that they're inveterate opponents of U.S. policy around the globe, whether under this president or before, and they're allied with longstanding U.S. enemies, including Iran, North Korea. That axis, Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, they continue to collaborate. They continue to be opposed to U.S. interests. The sooner the administration recognizes that and acts accordingly, the better off we'll be.
Final question before I let you go. Does the ceasefire hold?
I mean, the ceasefire hasn't held thus far because, at least from the Iranians' perspective, they thought Lebanon was included. Clearly, the Israelis did not believe that. We thought they were going to reopen the Straits of Hormuz. Clearly, the Iranians have not done that, or at least they've closed it temporarily again. So it's hard to know. We're so far apart on what the ceasefire was about, what the ceasefire was meant to do, and we're so far apart on what the 2 weeks are going to gain us in terms of where the middle ground on negotiations is. Now, the president did say he believes Iran's 10-point plan is a basis for negotiations. It's hard to believe because there's not a lot in there for the United States. And if that's true, then we might be giving away a lot to Iran. I think the president's going to realize that the 10-point plan is not actually helpful. He's going to have to renegotiate, and that's going to make this 2-week ceasefire very hard to keep in place, even over that time period, and much less at the end of it.
Hey, Jamil, I know I said it was my last question, but even as you were speaking, we got word that Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu was saying that Lebanon was not included in this ceasefire proposal. That being said, does the United States now have an Israel problem on its hands?
Well, it's hard to know. It depends on whether the U.S. thought Lebanon was part of the deal, right? In any contractual agreement, there has to be a meeting of the minds between the parties. In this case, the question is, did Iran and the United States have a meeting of the minds as to what the ceasefire was about? Was Israel part of that agreement, or were they aware of it? Were they told to simply take it the way it was, or did they come on board? And if they haven't come on board, what's the U.S. going to do about the fact that Israel is now attacking Lebanon? It's hard to imagine, Del, to be candid with you, that the U.S. would concede that Lebanon was a part of the deal, or that Hezbollah would not be attacked, given that it's a foreign listed terrorist organization. It has threatened Americans and allies for decades and killed Americans for decades. It's hard to imagine Hezbollah is part of any deal that the U.S. would do.
Jamil Jaffer with the National Security Institute at George Mason University, as I always say, the George Mason University. Jamil, thanks for being with us.
Thanks, Del.